I really don't know what connected me to Millennium Mams, but I thank my lucky stars to have found this organization that transformed me from a homemaker to an investor. Today, after 8 years with Millennium Mams, I know I'm right where I belong. I love my tribe, my community, and the way we empower each other. Thanks to my mentors for conceptualizing this idea 3 decades ago. Thank you, Mr. Vishnu Dhanuka and Mr. Sanjay Bhuwania. Although Bhuwania sir could not join us today, the mecca of investing beckoned us not once, but twice. We flew to Omaha to learn from the legendary guru of investing, Mr. Warren Buffett, once in 2012 and again in 2019. The Buffett Club was born after the first trip to Omaha. And the good news, my dear friends, please take a note. Good news is our next season of Buffett Club, conducted by Mr. Dhanuka himself, based on the principles of value investing, is starting once again on the 20th of October. So for details, you can get in touch with Preeti Agarwal. Managing the household, taking care of children's education, spenders, and of course, sometimes savers, being a pillar of support for the family, investing prudently. We've always had our plates full. But we needed a women investors community. Don't you think so, my dear friends? Thanks to Millennium Mams, that elusive community is now a reality. Breaking the stereotype, yes, my dear friends, breaking the stereotype was difficult, but you would agree if I say that we have overcome this challenge. And according to our mentor, Dhanuka sir, what better way to celebrate our new avatar than dedicate a special day to it, a Women Investors Day. And now there's a good news. It's going to be a yearly tradition. And for that, I would like to congratulate my dear friends, members of Millennium Mams, and everybody who's present here for this landmark celebration. And today, we have with us to celebrate this momentous occasion is Mr. Ashok Wadhwa of Ambit Capital. A chartered accountant and law graduate, Ashok has been the president of the prestigious FICCI and Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He has won many accolades like the Priyadarshini Academy Award for outstanding contribution in the field of financial management. He has created Ambit, one of India's premier investment banks, using his vast experience and in-depth knowledge. So friends, let us all put our hands together for Ashok Wadhwa, Group Chief Executive Officer of Ambit. And also today, Siddharth Rastogi, the MD of Ambit Investment Advisor, has joined us as a special guest. Thank you, Siddharth, for being our friend and a well-wisher. Now, Ashok, I would like to request you to please address our forum and make Women Investors Day a memorable event for us. Over to you, Ashok.
Thank you, Rachna. Thank you, Vishnuji. Ladies, I should say ladies and gentlemen. There are some gentlemen on the video today. So ladies and gentlemen, almost feels like a Krishna on this Janmashtami day. being
Yes.
amidst such wonderful people all around me in, of course, the virtual environment. So most grateful and honored that you gave me this opportunity to talk to you on such an auspicious occasion. You know, it's very difficult to speak in the context of an iconic individual like Warren Buffett. So I'll share my own few thoughts with you. Hopefully the thoughts resonate with you. Hopefully these thoughts will help you making decisions that you make while investing your invaluable and hard-earned money. First, a confession, ladies and gentlemen. I'm actually not a capital markets individual. I began my career as a chartered accountant in an iconic firm called Arthur Andersen. I was the managing partner of the firm for a very long time. So I'm an accountant by background. So the question should be, what is an accountant doing talking to us about capital markets? When I started Ambit, my vision for Ambit was never to be a capital markets organization. It was an M&A-led, mergers and acquisitions-led franchise. And honestly, if there's anything I know beyond accounting, it's a little of mergers and acquisitions. So as I said, a confession and a warning. I'm not an expert on the subject, and therefore you may choose not to be guided by my views. I would fully understand it, fully respect it, and fully appreciate it. But since I've been given this honor, as I said, let me share some thoughts with you. And I'll break my thoughts into three parts. Are there some basic principles that we follow while choosing companies, while choosing stocks, while choosing businesses to invest in? So some basic principles that we follow as I would call it from an Ambit perspective. These are our Gita, our Bible, our Quran, call it what you may. We try not to go outside the Lakshman Rekha of these, what I would call invaluable gems that my research team has worked very hard over the last 10 years to develop. So that's one. Second, are there good and bad industries? Is there a good industry to invest in today? Was there a bad industry to invest in yesterday? And third, do mergers and acquisitions, which is my pet subject, which is a subject on which I can talk a little more. Do they create value or do they destroy value? And I'll give you some anecdotes on both those. So very quickly, the first 3-4 principles of investing that we follow at Ambit and follow it quite religiously is what we call principles of good and clean investing. You've probably heard the word good and clean because we actually run a fund, a PMS fund, under the branding of Good and Clean Fund. It represents 4 simple values. And I would suggest, I would even argue, ladies and gentlemen, that these are very simple values, but if you articulate and apply these values in the art of investing, it is more likely that you will drop on the right side than on the wrong side. Remember one thing, markets are most unpredictable, almost like the British summer or the British winter, call it what you may, most unpredictable. And therefore, if anybody says that he knows how the market will behave, either he's a genius, which I'm not, or he's a liar, which I'm not. Choose as you may. But within those broad parameters of unpredictability of the market, are there some guiding principles? And we use 4 guiding principles for investing. First, clean accounting. It is important, critical, perhaps the single most important factor in determination of whether a company eventually will give you an adequate return or will not give you an adequate return. Businesses that follow good and clean accounting. What do we mean by good and clean accounting? After all these companies are audited by some of the most reputed organizations, accounting firms in the world. Yes. So was Enron audited by Arthur Andersen, my former organization. But we found out that leadership, management for their own vested interest, and those vested interests are financial gains because everybody has such large amounts of stock options granted to them. But managements at some points of time engage extensively in what we call creative accounting. In the case of Enron, which is a public case, one where I was involved at one point of time, the creative accounting came by discounting future income flows, expected income flows, and converting that into current income flows. What do? You overstate revenues as a result of that. And what does that mean? That means that your accounts are not truly reflecting the state of the accounts that you're presenting at the end of the year. Inflated revenues result in inflated numbers, inflated EBITDA, inflated PAT, which effectively means misguidance or incorrect guidance to the market on the performance of the company. Now, good auditors have picked this up. I can promise you, it is impossible for an audit firm, regardless of how well-versed it is, and these are all wonderful organizations, they're just full of brilliant individuals. But it is impossible for an auditor to be able to catch every single accounting jugglery that a company may do, which is why they say that auditors are not bloodhounds. They come in to validate accounts that are made by the companies. And therefore, if companies choose not to represent the accounts correctly, there is very little that an auditor can do to attack or pick on what we call creative accounting. And again, I go back, ladies and gentlemen, Enron is perhaps the best example in history of a multi-billion-dollar company that kind of lost all value. I mean, hundreds of billions of investor money was lost in less than a few weeks, and all because, creative accounting resulted in exaggerated revenues, resulted in exaggerated profits, and resulted in inflated valuations. So it is very important that the first test of judging a good company from an investment perspective is this company on a forensic, and Ambit has its own forensic model. We call it the Hawk. We test every company on the Hawk model. And it's not about some being right and some being wrong. It's sometimes about some being right and some being more right and some being more conservative. These days, for example, at a time when it is very difficult to understand what the impact of COVID on collections of small NBFCs. NBFCs give out money, secure and unsecured loans to several small borrowers. It's very difficult to be able to project how many of those borrowers will be able to repay, given that COVID has really impacted these small businesses in a very large way. And therefore, I would say it is very important for such NBFCs to be extra cautious and provide for additional potential losses, because these losses could easily accrue for no fault of the company. The lending was perfectly good when it was made. It is just that COVID, which was a completely unpredictable event, has made the businesses and therefore ability of those businesses to repay on time very difficult. So I would say that at this point of time, if you are looking at investing in an NBFC, it is very important to see how well have they provided for potential losses in this difficult and unpredictable environment. So good accounting is very critical. Better accounting is even more important. And when some companies, you'll often see, perhaps using a good example, you can take Kotak Bank, you can take HDFC Bank, and you will see that Kotak Bank and HDFC Bank command a significantly higher book multiple compared to many other banks, peer banks. And the reason they do that is because people have lots of trust and believe in the numbers that are stated. They believe that these banks are conservative and will always perhaps be conservative and understate the numbers versus overstate numbers. I'm not saying understating is the right principle, but I'm just saying understating profits is a little better than overstating profits. Between the two, trying to state the profits right is always the right answer. The second principle that we follow is good governance, related party transactions. Companies that are well governed, independent boards that are seriously engaged in the business of the company, boards that understand their responsibility towards minority shareholders, boards that will question promoters on transactions that may not be in the interest of the minority shareholders. Well-governed companies normally protect the interest of minority shareholders significantly better than less governed companies. And to us, that's an important issue, because in many instances, we have seen very good companies and good businesses, good performance, but perhaps a little compromised when it comes to the interest of the promoter versus the interest of the minority shareholders. And again, you will read reams of information on how different advisory groups will advise you on whether to vote in one transaction or not to vote on one transaction. There are multiple examples of companies that were not appropriately governed, and that really, despite the fact that they had very high valuations in the market, perhaps they saw a serious drop in the valuation of those businesses. We've seen that happen in our own country. I don't know how many of you remember there used to be a bank called GTB Bank, Global Trust Bank, very well thought out bank at one point of time. Suddenly, when it came to the question of governance and when issues came up on related party transactions, the whole pack of cards came running down, because it was deemed to be seen as a company that was not well governed. And as a result of related party transactions, there were certain acts, certain transactions that were done that were questionable. And I would argue that, well-governed companies will always deserve a premium. Less governed companies will always get a discount in comparison. In every industry, you will get well-governed companies, and you can compare their valuation with other players in the same industry, and you will see how better governed companies command a significantly higher premium versus less governed companies. And I gave you the example of Kotak Bank and HDFC Bank as two wonderful examples of very well-run governed institutions. The third principle that we follow in Ambit in terms of where do we invest and what do we recommend to our clients is true competitive edge. There are businesses that mushroom and grow at points of time. The question that you have to ask yourself is, what is their sustainable competitive edge? Is it technology? Is it a unique formulation? Or is it just, we have seen in India that lots of companies, and perhaps real estate is one area where we can talk about this. We can talk about government contracting is another area where we can talk about it. Companies where there is greater amount of political patronage tend to lose value in the long term. Companies that have sustainable competitive edge based on either technology or first mover advantage or scale that they have built for themselves or some unique capability that they have developed for themselves tend to provide a return in a very long term. Asian Paints perhaps is a wonderful example of a company that has delivered returns year after year after year because their product development, their technology, their understanding of the consumer requirement is significantly greater than almost many of their peers in the marketplace. In more recent times, you will see Pidilite as one such example of a company that has always tried to outshine itself through new product development, new technology, through expansion of their market, through expansion of their distribution network. And that's a great example of a company that has created phenomenal value and will continue to create phenomenal value. L&T, L&T is operating in businesses where there is so much government intervention. And yet, L&T has been able to demonstrate that they can continue scaling their business because they have solid capability. I mean, the best engineers, the maximum number of, I would call most qualified engineers probably work for Larsen & Toubro. And that provides them with skill sets that in the most difficult times will allow them to continue growing, because that's an important competitive edge that they have, as against many other companies that may have used government or political patronage to kind of win contracts and be able to build themselves on that basis. So we see a competitive edge as an important sustainable advantage, which allows you to create value over a very, very long period of time. The last but the most important perhaps is capital allocation. Capital is scarce. And here I tell you, we intermediaries, bankers are also partly responsible. I think the bankers sometimes forget that it is our responsibility as much as the investors' responsibility and accountability to ensure that capital is allocated and provided to people that are going to leverage that capital and use that capital to generate the best value. We all know that capital is available in limited quantities. We also know that that capital can be deployed in multi-opportunities. And it's our responsibility, along with the promoters, to make sure that the allocation happens in a manner and into companies that deliver the best value. Think about it, right? I mean, if Infosys was to go out and try and raise capital, I mean, that would be a completely wrong thing for them to do. They would completely depress their ROEs because they're already so capitalized. So companies that have excess cash have now learned in India to give out their cash. ROE, return on equity, is a very important yardstick today of determining how responsibly the company is behaving and how they're allocating the capital. Just because I have cash doesn't mean I should deploy that cash to buy some other business. As a matter of fact, quite the contrary. When companies deploy excessive cash to buy some other business, we look down upon those companies because we say to them that the shareholders gave you, if you're an IT services company, the shareholders gave you this money to run an IT services business. If you don't need this money or it is excessive, please return it back to the shareholders, do a buyback, pay dividend out, do whatever else you want. But please do not use that cash as your personal cash to deploy in some unrelated business. Because if I wanted to buy shares of a media company, then I'll go to the market and buy shares of a media company. I'm not giving money to an IT company to go invest in a media company. And that's what I mean by capital allocation. And it's very important that capital allocation is done sensibly, rationally, and most importantly, responsibly. This is where perhaps many Indian groups over the years have faltered, ladies and gentlemen. Every decade, I can give you examples of how out of the top 50 companies, 25 companies have faltered and therefore are no longer in the top 50. Forget top 50, they're probably not in the top 100 or top 200. Some other company that has emerged as a more competitive company in that space. So I would say those would be my 4 broad guiding principles of how to choose what I would call good and clean companies. Good solid accounting principles, conservative accounting, good governance, respect for minority shareholders, responsible capital allocation, and some competitive edge that allows you sustainability in your growth trajectory for many years to come. That would be one piece that I want to share with you, ladies and gentlemen. Are there good companies and bad companies? Or are there good industries and bad industries? So in 2014, when real estate was actually compounding and probably delivering the best return, in 2014, we did a study and we found out that a typical Indian household saves 33% of the total earnings. And out of the 33%, 11% went to the market, 11% went to gold, and 11% went to real estate. So 1/3 of the saving used to get invested in real estate. And why? Because everybody thought that real estate was going to give unlimited return. Why? Because if there is one thing that even God can't make, it's land. Everything else is possible, but God can't make even more land unless, of course, Telstra and Jeff Bezos decide to create land in the space. We have to wait and see. Perhaps in a generation after us, perhaps many generations after us, but certainly during our lifetime, ladies and gentlemen, it's unlikely that there will be more land that will be created. And that was the basis on which people said limited supply, unlimited demand, it will continue to grow in price. Well, there is no concept of unlimited demand. You know, I used to have a Spaniard as a boss, and he used to tell me, what goes up comes down. What goes up fast comes down faster. And real estate in Bombay was a very good example of that. So in 2014, we actually wrote a thesis and a research report, which became quite iconic, I have to say, which probably brought Ambit's equity business into limelight, was why real estate was bound to crash in India. It was a 2014 report, and you know, don't want to be sounding immodest, ladies and gentlemen, but if you look at 2014 to 2019, that prediction came pretty right. And there was no science to that prediction. I mean, we don't need to be a rocket scientist to be able to predict it. It was so obvious that people had invested in real estate on a very, very, well, it was really taking blind bets, assuming that it will continue compounding at the rate at which it had historically compounded. That was not to be. It was obvious that it was going to come down. Therefore, as I said, didn't need a rocket scientist to say that, you know, real estate is going to come down. And between 2014 and 2019, we actually saw a significant drop in real estate. There are people who listened to our advice. There are people who thought we were foolish. And you know, obviously there are winners and there are losers in every battle, and that was not different. In 2017, we came up with a thesis that Indian chemical industry had reinvented itself from being a group which was purely known for re-engineering products, or which was a pure contract manufacturing. Our scientists and our chemists had put their mind and soul together and were now generating and creating new chemistry, which will become critical for all, as an intermediary for all pharma companies, animal healthcare companies, and indeed for all specialty chemical businesses. That's the report we came out in 2017. We're now in 2021, and chemical companies cannot stop smiling. Cannot stop. Again, there was no rocket science to this, ladies and gentlemen. If you go back to 2004, there were only two multinationals in the Indian pharma industry, Cadila and Ranbaxy. One of them, unfortunately, is no more. Ranbaxy is no more. It's now part of Sun Pharma. But think about it. From 2004 to 2012, 2014, innumerable Indian companies came into the horizon on the back of using India's great chemical and pharmaceutical capability. We have some of the most intelligent and skilled scientists and engineers in this country. And to just label them as re-engineers, re-engineering global products, is incorrect. And when they decided that they were going to generate new chemistry and new molecules, there was no doubt in my mind that it would go a completely new route. And we think chemicals is following exactly where the pharma industry was. Where the pharma industry was in 2004 was our reading, was where the chemical industry was in 2017. And just like pharma had a phenomenal 8-10 year run, we think chemical is in the same zone right now. So there are times when certain changes, structural changes happen in certain industries, and those structural changes actually expedite and are catalyst to the growth of that industry in a completely different manner. And I'm sure every generation will give such industries, some that will be seen as sunset industries, some that will be seen as sunrise industries, and both of them will have their own field day. And just because there is a sunset industry doesn't mean it remains in sunset all times. So when COVID came in, for example, ladies and gentlemen, we called out and said that real estate is going to come back in vogue. Between 2015 and 2018, we already saw commercial real estate, starting to become more and more attractive, because global investors, the GICs and the Blackstones of the world, had started seriously looking at commercial real estate from a REIT perspective. And when COVID hit, we realized that working from home was going to become a working principle for many, many organizations. And as working from home became an accepted principle, everybody would look at buying a little bigger house, a little new house, and true. If you look at the results from 2020, 2021, residential real estate has seen one of the highest upticks compared to most other industries. So you have to read these events in conjunction. Sunset doesn't mean, remember one thing, after every sunset there is a sunrise, and after every sunrise there is a sunset. And markets follow exactly similar types of principles quite often. Last subject, ladies and gentlemen, do mergers and acquisitions create value, or do they destroy value? Mergers and acquisitions are always done. The initial belief, the initiation of a merger or acquisition is always on the back of there will be value accreted, but it does not always do so. Partly because mergers and acquisitions are difficult to implement. They consume a lot of critical management time. They're difficult to implement, but even more important, once you have acquired or you have merged somebody with you, it is very difficult to generate synergies on the basis of which you initially rationalize that whole acquisition itself. And I can give you multiple examples of companies where mergers have turned out to be hugely accretive. I mean, for Tata Motors, Jaguar was really, God-sent acquisition. Tata Motors was struggling to find an identity for itself. Jaguar was an iconic British brand that was struggling to find quality manufacturing skills in its team. And Tata's went and acquired it as a relatively distressed asset. And look at what Tata's did in turning that business around. And look at what Jaguar's acquisition did for Tata's. Completely changed the scale. Tata's is no longer, Tata's are now a global brand. Jaguar competes with BMW and Mercedes. Could you have ever thought of an Indian company 25 years ago? Could any of us have thought? Remember, we used to apply and wait in a queue to buy a company, buy a car called Ambassador and Fiat, both of which, by the way, should have been in a museum 25 years ago. They were in a museum everywhere else in the world. We were still driving them around. And look at what Jaguar did. It changed the landscape for Indian motor car industry. And after that, we have seen, huge number of developments in that space. So Jaguar was a hugely accretive business for Tata's. We can also give you multiple examples of how acquisitions have actually destroyed value. And in particular, where Indian companies in between 2005 and 2007 became very acquisitive and made global acquisitions, many Indian companies suffered because they just could not integrate those businesses into their businesses, and they destroyed values. So mergers and acquisitions are generally accretive in value. The initial idea behind a merger, we bankers do these things all the time. The general idea to begin with is very accretive. And I'll give you another very good example of accretion. I went to a gentleman called Darshan Singh. He used to run a bank called Bank of Punjab. His market cap was 300 crores in 2005. And I asked Darshan, I said, Darshan, what is your great desire in running this bank? He said, my father used to be Sardar Inderjeet Singh, the founder of Punjab and Sindh National Bank. And as a lineage of that family, I would like to create serious value. So I said, but have you ever assessed whether you can create value, or is your bank better than somebody else's hand? It took me 90 days of persuasion, but after 90 days, I managed to convince him that he should merge into Centurion Bank. The rest is history, ladies and gentlemen. Centurion Bank, when we restructured it under the leadership of Rana Talwar, was valued at 300 crores in 2003. In 2008, we merged Centurion Bank into HDFC Bank at a valuation of 12,500 crores. I struggled to raise capital at 300 crores, and I eventually merged it at a valuation of 12,500 crores. Many millionaires were created in that transaction. At that time, it was the single largest banking transaction in the country. But what I'm saying over here is, when I went to see Darshanjeet Singh after the merger, so he merged into Centurion Bank, and Centurion Bank merged into HDFC Bank. At the time when I went to see him initially, his 33% in a 300 crore bank was worth 100 crores. He became a very small shareholder. Ultimately, when the merger happened, he was only a 3% shareholder, 3.5% shareholder. But that 3.5% was worth 3,000 crores at that point of time. So you do create value if you do these transactions in a strategically well thought through manner. But more importantly, the credit for that shouldn't come to us as bankers. The credit for that should go to Aditya Puri, because only he could have extracted value from Centurion Bank to create that value. So for no small reason is Aditya Puri known as, I think when the history of the banking world will be written, Aditya Puri will be known as the god of the Indian banking sector. And here is the reason why he would be known for that. I can also give you examples of how people have destroyed value by becoming acquisitive and made wrong acquisitions. But that's for some other day, ladies and gentlemen. My time to talk to you is done and over. I was given 25 minutes. I think I'm over with 25 minutes. I will now hand over the camera back to Rachna. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Ashok. Thank you for the in-depth and crystal clear presentation. The principle you've spoken about, good and clean investing, I'm sure it will certainly give us a competitive edge and sustainable advantage as investors. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing your words of wisdom for us. And now I would like to move on to the Q&A session, because my members, they're eagerly waiting to interact with you. So I would like to request first Nidhi Kanoi from Mumbai to please come forward and ask question. Nidhi, it's your turn.
Yes, good afternoon, sir. Sir, I wanted to know, the Indian debt market is currently $2 trillion versus 119 trillion worldwide and 46 trillion in the USA. What do you feel needs to be done by the government and private players in the next few years to increase this substantially, sir?
So I think my one request to all the members, including Nidhi, will be please address me by my first name.
Sure, sure.
I have to look left and right to see who are you addressing. I'm not used to being called other than MD Ashok.
Sure.
So here is the issue. There is no debate that Indian bond market, Indian debt market is very, very shallow. There are several reasons for that. Part of it is that public sector was always in a giving mode. The money from public sector was readily, easily available, and often you didn't even have to repay. We've seen the effect of that on our banks as a result of that. Thankfully, this government has stepped in and stopped that road completely. And for that, I give all the credit to this government. They are the first ones to have said, enough is enough. Public sector is not available as your private treasury. If you take money from public sector, you will return it. So that's number one. Second, I think the Indian bond market, in particular, the secondary market, is a relatively shallow market. Over the last 2-3 years, both SEBI as the regulator and RBI on the other side have tried to encourage people to go out. And you can actually see early signals of a robust bond market being born in India. Also, what happened in between was, overseas leverage was available, foreign currency bonds were available, and kind of all those, or some of those esoteric instruments took the mind and opportunity away from the Indian capital markets. But just like SEBI was quick to react and bring in a QIP to make sure that FCCBs and other instruments, ADRs and FCCBs, there was a time when there was only ADRs and FCCBs, there was no QIPs and other instruments in India. So I think the regulator has taken cognizance of that. And between RBI and SEBI, they're both now committed to making sure that they create adequate incentives for deepening of the Indian bond market. Also remember, particularly when you are borrowing for capex, which is a very large driver of borrowing in India, the bond market was a short-term market. Typical people were willing to lend money for a 2, 3, 5-year period. We're now seeing early signs of a 10-year and a 20-year bond market coming. And as both regulation changes, regulatory intervention comes in, and people realize that there is an alternate. Certainly, the public sector market is not readily available, and even if you borrow, you have to repay. I think you will see the development of a new market.
Thank you, Ashok.
Yeah, next, Sunita Rock, you can come in, please. Preeti Agarwal.
Yes, hi.
Yeah.
Hi, Ashok. A very good evening. So, my question, Ashok, is on a very lighter note that, and we being a all girls forum, and we are celebrating our Investors Day today. I would like to know your point of view on the book written by Mr. Warren Buffett, Invest Like a Girl. Can we have your comments about the changing face of investments?
And what extra edge we have.
Yes.
Listen, I have to tell you, and this is an honest confession, that I do not make any important decision in my life without consulting with my wife. And it's not a fashionable statement that I'm taking. Whether it is recruitment of a very important colleague, or it is judgment about something important, I have come to believe that women may be more emotional, but they're far more rational. And because they tend to look at things from a little distance, I'm a follower of Swami Chinmayananda. And Swami Chinmayananda used to say that if you want to enjoy a painting, you have to learn to distance yourself from the painting. Wow. You can't enjoy a large painting by standing very close to it. You have to distance yourself to be able to enjoy a large painting.
Very
Women have the ability to be able to distance themselves so that the enormity of the painting can be visualized and imagined in its fullest creativity. We tend to be so close to issues that we get blinded. So it's my belief that women tend to make more rational decisions. Having said that, let's not forget that the only thing I would say is that when it comes to stock market, and I go back to another woman in my life, my mother-in-law, who's no more. She used to enjoy investing in the market, and she would wear her glasses like this, sit at 11 o'clock in the morning on front of the television and say, "Aaj ye khareed leti hu main." And she did that. And, in the initial period, my father-in-law thought he was doing the right thing. And soon he learned that he was doing the wrong thing because his losses far exceeded his. So all that I'm also trying to say is that, it needs an element of knowledge and understanding. Market is not like a roulette table. It's not. Market needs a lot of study, a lot of analysis, a lot of research. So my humble submission to everybody is use your very rational thinking, but after having read and educated yourself on the nuances of the market.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Very well said, sir. Thank you.
You said it all, Ashok. Yeah. Next, Shweta, you can come in, please.
Yes. Good evening, Ashok. You said about the merger and acquisition is unleashing the valuation of a business. So my question is, with the unprecedented acquisition and mergers in the past few months, the biggers are becoming bigger. And sir, what is your opinion on, will the new startups and businesses have any scope of scaling up?
Very good question. Let me break this into two parts. I often get asked a question to say, why are these companies that are already so expensive becoming more and more expensive? How is it that COVID has impacted others but not impacted these companies? So let's take two companies an example that I used earlier also, Asian Paints and Pidilite. Perhaps we can take one or two others, D-Marts, others if you want. Mm-hmm. Why is it that these companies, despite being expensive, are becoming more and more expensive when COVID has actually affected demand? So here is my answer to that. For sure, COVID has affected demand. We continue to remain optimistic that at some point of time, this demand will come back with vengeance. But there is no debate that from the time we all got affected by this pandemic to today, demand has got a little subdued and remains subdued. So if the demand remains subdued, why have these valuations gone up? And the answer is simple, ladies and gentlemen. Remember there is demand and supply, which determines the price. On the supply side, almost all industries in India, across board, at least 25 to 50% of the product supply came from what I call unorganized sector. Sectors that use tax arbitrage, GST arbitrage, employee provident fund arbitrage as the only competitive reason why they were existing. Starting with demon, then going to GST, and now with COVID. These companies have completely been destroyed. And do remember that that destruction has resulted in significant increase in unemployment. That's on one side. But what has done is the destruction on the supply chain is greater than the slowdown of demand. So whatever demand is coming up is going to these big companies, the large organized players. So Asian Paints is getting even more demand than it got, not because the overall demand has not come down, but because those who are supplying the demand have gone down even more sharply. So that demand has gone up, and which is why you are seeing that expensive companies are becoming even more expensive, because their prospects of continuing to grow and compounding is getting significantly enhanced. So that's one part of it. The second part of your question was, is there room for these new companies to emerge? And I said this to you before. We've done an analysis decade after decade over the last 5 years. You take the top 100 companies, every decade has changed at least 50% of the constituents, which means in every decade, at least 50 new companies have emerged, and 50 of the top companies have probably gone down. Some may have gone forever, some may have become less attractive than the bigger ones. And again, there are wonderful examples of companies. And I mean, at one time, Nirlon and Orke were the two biggest textile companies in the country. Look at where they are today in comparison to where their peers are. In particular, I would say this decade is going to make an even more dramatic change, because this decade is the culmination of many years of change in the way business is done. Advent of internet, use of e-commerce, and digitization, all three coming together is changing the way business is done. Who would have thought that there would be a Swiggy or a Paytm or a Policy Bazaar 10 years ago? These companies, trust me, are going to become a part of our Sensex in the next 3 years. So I continue to believe that the changes that you will see in this decade will be even sharper and greater than the changes that you've seen in the past.
Great. Thank you. Wow. Srinidhi?
Yes, Rachna. So Ashok, my question is on mergers and acquisitions. We have found that sometimes when Indian companies take over companies abroad, foreign subsidiaries, so the profitability gets affected for the Indian companies. Why do you think this happens?
Can you repeat that? With Indian companies?
When Indian companies make acquisitions abroad. Yes.
Why do their valuations go down?
Overall profitability.
The overall profitability at times is affected, we find.
No. So go back to the point I made earlier, that there are acquisitions that are very accretive, and there are acquisitions that are value destructive. And I can give you multiple examples. To begin with, there is one truth that we have to understand.
Yes.
Operating in India is different from operating in a global environment. With no disrespect to our promoters, those promoters that grew up in a shut India, in an India that was not open to doing business with the larger competitors, never trained itself to go in the open arena and fight a battle, right? When your market is insulated and you're protected by government policies in your market, it's a true challenge to go out and try and compete with the larger boys in an open arena. To begin with, that happened. Having said that, there are many companies in India, there are many promoters in India that demonstrated very quick learning skills. Tata's is a good example. I would also say Birla's. They acquired Novelis. The acquisition of Novelis to begin with was seen as perhaps dilutive. It took the Birla family a little while, but as soon as they put all their might behind it, they were able to turn it around. They may have had to sell parts of it, but eventually they showed that they could generate huge value out of that acquisition. Take Wokhard. Wokhard acquired many companies. In some areas, they couldn't demonstrate ability to be able to integrate and get benefit. In some, they could. Take United Spirits. United Spirits went and acquired White and McKay. See, when an acquisition is driven by emotion, when an acquisition is driven purely because size is important for me, when acquisition is driven more because, well, everybody has done it, therefore I must do it, it's a wrong reason to make that acquisition. It's bound to fail to begin with. But when it is made on good judgment, good strategic thinking, I'm getting access to a new market, or I'm getting access to a new technology, and that forms the basis of that acquisition, it is bound to succeed. So in certain instances, it is fair to say, we did an analysis in the acquisitions made between 2005 and 2010 by Indian promoters, and it is fair to say that several of those acquisitions were value destructors and not value accretors, because many of them were driven by, there is an opportunity to go acquire, there is easy money available to acquire, it's a touche, everybody else has done it, why should I not do it? Wrong reasons to do it. I'm getting a new access to a new market. Jaguar is going to rewrite the framework of the Tata Motors company. Good reason, very good reason to go acquire. You look at the technology companies, whether it is Infosys, whether it is Wipro, they've made several acquisitions, and all of them have been accretive because they have used good judgment and good strategic thought process to support their acquisition program. So emotion, touche, ego, cheap, available, all wrong reasons to acquire. Strategic fitment gives me access to a market, gives me access to a technology, gives me access to a brand, all good reasons to make an acquisition.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next question is from Neha. Neha, you can come in.
Yes. Good evening, Ashok. This is Neha Prem Rajka from Mumbai. So my question is, one of the principles of Mr. Warren Buffett states that to be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful. So do you think it is the time to be fearful in the Indian market, sir?
You know, honestly, when you become a legend like Warren Buffett, you can walk on water. Whatever you say becomes an iconic statement. So I have to first say that I dare not go the path that a legend like that has traveled, because we are normal human beings, and we must learn to live within the framework that our skills allow us to live within, right? Is it fearful to go to the market? Here is what I would say to you. The market is looking more and more expensive. In particular, certain stocks in the market are looking very expensive. No doubt about that. I would be cautious. Having said that, for reasons that I stated earlier, that the destruction of supply chain is probably greater than the dilution of demand. And therefore, so long as companies have demonstrated, and also don't forget, I think there's one other thing we should not forget. We must compliment Indian companies and Indian promoters for the manner in which they have gone about cost saving during this pandemic period. They have not sat back and said, pandemic has arrived, and therefore what do I do? Put your hands up. They have all worked systematically on saying, how do I contain cost? How do I reduce cost? How do I become more effective and efficient? Number one. Number two, don't forget that technology, automation, and digitization is now making it much faster, much cheaper, much more convenient to be able to deliver. So certain costs of intermediation, for example, are all going away. That's all going to result in enhanced income. Last but not the least, don't forget, we are living in a relatively benign interest regime. These very companies are used to borrowing at 12 and 13%. Today, they are borrowing at 7%, some of them 6%. I mean, just think about the amount of savings that they are earning on their income, because of the interest cost saving. So all of these factors put together has resulted in Indian companies becoming far more efficient, leaner, better, and efficient. So some element of market exuberance can be easily attributed to these important changes that have happened. To some extent, the market is getting into risky zone. One thing you must remember is it only takes a genius like Warren Buffett to be able to time the market. Even he makes mistakes once in a while. We normal human beings have to realize that it is impossible to time the market to go in at the lowest step and come out at the highest step. Just doesn't work. So my recommendation to everybody is be cautiously optimistic. Indian economy continues to be positive. The outcome and belief and the trajectory of growth and expansion for these businesses continues to be positive. Lots of wonderful things are happening around us. I think government is taking some very important initiatives. I mean, this demonetization plan that the government has announced, outstanding plan, outstanding plan. These are transformational plans. And my own view is that as Indian economy learns to recoup from the challenges on this pandemic, and as more and more human beings realize that this pandemic is one more disease that we have to learn to live with, there will be greater optimism. So remain cautiously optimistic, and on a stock to stock basis, decide where you want to remain invested and where you don't want to remain invested.
Okay, thank you so much, sir, for amazing insights on this. Thank you.
Ashok, on this positive note, I would like to ask you about ESG investing. The opportunities for ESG investors recently, I read that it's shrinking since companies are not agreeable to meet the global warming target. What are your views on ESG investing?
ESG is a reality. All businesses have to realize that sooner or later, we will have to be fully compliant with environmental rules, with governance standards. We have to be socially responsible.
Yes.
Our governance levels have to be of a new standard. And here is how it happens. More and more investors today are being driven to be ESG compliant, which means these investors take the Norwegian sovereign fund, Norgen. Norgen will not invest in an ESG non-compliant company, full stop. Try and raise capital today for a power project which is coal driven. I promise you, you will not get the equity. You may not even get the debt. Try and do a QIP of a company that is badly governed. You will just not get the right response from the market.
True.
Which is why I said it is very important that capital allocators, investors and the intermediaries embrace these concepts and ensure that capital is only allocated to those who act responsibly. And what happens? If you say, I don't want to be ESG compliant and you can't access capital, you'll have no choice, because all your peers and competitors will be growing and be more competitive than you. They'll access capital, you won't be able to access capital. Their cost of borrowing will be 6%, your cost of borrowing will be 12%. It will force you. The financial environment will force you to comply with ESG. So the government regulation on one side and the capital allocation on the other side will force everybody to come to a common ground. I have no doubts that ESG is here to live. Everybody must embrace it, and those who don't will have to face the consequences of being non-competitive.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Either you shape up or you ship out.
Right.
Absolutely. And the last question, Ashok, it's already 5, just one question I'll take, and then we'll have a celebration, which the Bangalore BAMS, they are very enthusiastically, they've prepared something for us. So last question will be from Meenu Banka.
Hello, Ashok. I wanted to ask that you had rightly predicted the sunrise sectors in 14 and 17. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes, yeah.
I can't predict the
Yeah.
next one. That's all.
So, yeah. So some guesses.
Water. We don't understand the importance of water in our life. You know, the old principle, Ghar ki murgi dal barabar. It's available readily, it's available easily, so we don't value it. One day, water will be the most valuable commodity. Hopefully it's not in our generation, but I'm not talking about on a more serious note. Listen, I mean, there are such important changes happening around us right now. I mean, could anybody have believed that all of you ladies on this program would be buying on Nykaa and not going to Sephora to buy your fashion products? I mean, today you are all buying on Nykaa, right? Partly pushed by COVID. The closures around us made it virtually impossible to step out. And therefore, Nykaa became a homegrown name, right? I mean, all of you now know Nykaa as well as you know Sephora. And I would say that these important changes are going to bring new players. Here is what I will tell you. New players will emerge in every segment because technology and digitization is not for one business. Technology and digitization does not belong to one industry. It is a concept that every industry has to accept. And I get asked a question very often, will online prevail over offline? I'm sorry, there's no such concept. These are multiple channels, alternate channels of delivering the same goods and the same services. When the restaurants open, you will all go back to eating at the restaurant. But that doesn't mean you won't use Swiggy and Zomato to order at home. Both will continue to prevail. In the same house, the younger generation will be swigging and Zomatoing, and the older generation will be stepping out to go and eat outside. People ask me, is this the end of PVR? Is this the end of Inox? Because OTT is now going to rule the world? Absolutely not. I remember when the video VCR, the video tape recorder, whatever it was, VCR, when VCR first came into existence and we used to get those video tapes, I remember for 7 years, I did not go to a theater. And by the way, I'm a movie buff. I enjoy watching movies,
And a travel buff also.
Yeah, so I stopped going to theaters. For 7 years, I did not go to a theater. The first movie I saw after 7 years was Hum Aapke Hain Kaun. I remember that in a theater. But did it stop me from going to theater again? Absolutely not. Theaters were replaced by multiplexes and we all enjoyed the multiplexes. Now we're enjoying OTT because that's the environment. When it all opens up and when we know that this pandemic or corona is nothing other than one more flu and we've learned to live with it or deal with it, we will continue going back to theater. Now that doesn't mean we will not consume OTT. We will consume OTT and we will consume theaters. Perhaps linear television will become more and more, a rural event, and OTT will take over the linear television, the linear programming in the metros. So
it's already doing so.
Yeah. So there will be coexistence. We have to learn to live with the world coexistence. Online and offline will coexist, as will all of us until we go.
But the valuation, especially for Zomato, we heard it's so bad, yet it's done so well, the IPO. So, you think that is
okay?
Whoever said there is a science or whoever said that there is a science to determine valuation. Valuation is in the eyes of the beholder. I keep telling my wife I'm not a handsome guy. She keeps telling me you are the most handsome guy.
Thank you, Ashok. Thank you for this session. And there was so much of positivity, and I would say there's so much to cheer and so many reasons for us to cheer, as investors. Thanks a lot. And over to the Bangalore ma'ams. They are eagerly waiting for the celebration. Yes, Vineet and team, over to you.
cake.
Happy birthday, Mr. Warren Buffett.
From all of us at Millennium Mams.
Wow.
Thank you.
I want to be born Warren Buffett in my next life. Not for the money he's made, but for the cakes he gets.
We'll be in Mumbai, Ashok, to celebrate your birthday this time.
Thank you.
Yes, Dineet, over to you.
Yes. So it's my privilege today to propose a vote of thanks on the momentous occasion of Mr. Warren Buffett's birthday. Thank you, Mr. Ashok, for being so generous in sharing your findings and opinions today. You echo the same sentiments of our founder, Mr. Vishnu Dhanuka and Mr. Sanjay Bhavania, who also believe in long-term wealth creation. We go back from this forum today with more awareness and knowledge of investing sensibly, rationally, and responsibly, and in coexistence. Last but not the least, I would like to thank our mentors for empowering us and our members for their cooperation in making this event a success. Thank you.